All right, hello Chapel View, and hello viewers at home. This is our Rogers and Hammerstien program. We are going to talk about two of the most prolific musical composers in American history, Richard Rogers and Oscar Hammerstien. So individually, these men were musical legends. If they had never met each other, if they had never made one single musical together, they still would have been Hall of Fame musical composers. They still would have had theaters named after them. They still would have been great. And in fact, they didn't meet each other until later, much later in their careers, and they only made about 10 musicals, 9 or 10 musicals together. So it was actually a fairly small portion of Richard Rogers' repertoire, for instance. But the 10 musicals they made together, maybe it was a little bit less than that, are some of the greatest musicals of all time and were really transformative in musical theater. In fact, I would say that Richard Rogers and Oscar Hammerstien created the template for the modern American musical. We're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the biographies of these two, mostly because unlike somebody like Irving Berlin, their backstories just aren't super interesting. They both came from upper middle class backgrounds, so we're not going to spend too much time. I will start with Richard Rogers here. He was born in 1902 to a German Jewish family, and actually the part of he lived in Queens, and there were a lot of Jewish immigrants at the time in that area. And he's a fascinating man. He composed over 900 songs in his lifetime, if you could imagine that. And interestingly, as a young man, Richard Rogers, as a boy, would go with his parents to the Hammerstien Theater. That would be the theater owned by the uncle or the parents or grandparents of Oscar Hammerstien, his future musical collaborator. Richard Rogers was born with the ability to create music at a young age. By the time he was 6 years old, he was playing piano almost effortlessly. And he was able to hear music coming through a window in a nearby apartment, and he could sit at the piano and he could duplicate that, so he could play by ear. And I apologize, we're missing a photograph here, but at 19 years old, he was accepted to what today is called Juilliard, one of the most prestigious musical schools in the country. And this is a man who was born to play music. Well, at some point, Richard Rogers enters Columbia University. Interestingly, around the same time that Richard Rogers went to Columbia University, so did his future partner, Oscar Hammerstien, and so did this man here, this intense young man, Lorenz Hart. They were introduced at a college party. Richard Rogers was a great musical composer. Even as a young man, he had a real gift for it. And Lorenz Hart was a talented lyricist. And so while they were still at Columbia, they decided, well, let's start writing some musicals. We can do it for so fraternity groups. We can do it for college or campus productions. And if we get really lucky, maybe we can get something on or even off Broadway. And so even though they were still at the time doing their studies, they began collaborating together. Again, like thunder. Lorenz Hart writing the lyrics and Richard Rogers composing music. After years of effort, or at least a couple years of effort, they weren't getting anywhere. To the point where Richard Rogers almost gave up music entirely to become a children's clothing salesman. Now think about that. No Oklahoma, no South Pacific, No Sound of Music. Instead, another children's clothing salesman. What does the world need more? I think we're all very, very lucky that what happened next, the Garrick Gaieties. So he's about to give up and go his separate way with Lorenz Hart and become a children's clothing salesman. And lo and behold, there is a Broadway production called the Garrick Gaieties, not something that anyone now would remember, but they decide to purchase and use Rodgers and Hart music. And luckily for them, the Garrick Gaieties wasn't a flop, it was a hit. It ran for 200 showings, and thousands of people in New York went to see the Garrick Gaieties and heard this wonderful music from this young duo, Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart. And the songs really stuck. I don't think anyone can tell you anything about the scene Garrick Gaieties, but they can certainly sing the song Manhattan, for instance. So Manhattan in particular became a huge hit for Rodgers and Hart. And basically, after the Garrick Gaieties, Rodgers and Hart became a known quantity on the music scene in New York, on Broadway. People began asking them to work on their productions, and they became eventually a huge hit and one of the biggest collaborative acts in the music industry. And I want to just give you a taste of the talent that Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart had together. Because Richard Rodgers, much of his career was with Lorenz Hart, not Oscar Hammerstien. So again, the music is Richard Rodgers. The lyrics are Lorenz Hart, this kind of short in stature, intense, introverted young man. Let's take a look at one of the greatest singers of all time, Ella Fitzgerald, who was a big fan of Rodgers and Hart, performing their hit Manhattan from the Garrick Gaieties.
My name is Shay, and
oh, but good, we have an ad. Well, Shay, we are going to skip you as soon as possible. What a voice Ella had. So the song does go on, but just for the sake of time, and we haven't even gotten to Oscar Hammerstien and Richard Rodgers yet, which is what the program's really about. But I wanted you to hear that just delicious melody that, did I say delicious melody? It was tasty though, wasn't it?
I enjoyed it.
I thought it was good. I'm not sure why I said that.
Good
but
to the last
good to the last drop. But that melody that just really sticks with you. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. You could see really that talent of Richard Rodgers for creating a melody that'll just stick in your head all day. And the playfulness of Lorenz Hart's lyrics. They're whimsical, you know, the way they rhyme, it's really sophisticated, the way she puts words together. It's wonderful. So you can see why quickly, once Manhattan came out and other tunes, things really took off. As a matter of fact, they had a 20-year partnership. So, you know, again, Richard Rodgers spent most of his career with Lorenz Hart. They created 26, they wrote for 26 Broadway musicals. Think about that, 26 Broadway musicals. Fairly enough, we can't name most of them. So when Hammerstien and Rodgers come together, we know every one of their musicals. One's better than the other. But the music from Rodgers and Hart is definitely has been immortalized. Songs like Blue Moon, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, The Lady is a Tramp, and My Funny Valentine are songs that we know so well. So this is not a word, by the way, Brittany. Includal.
Do you feel included?
I feel included. Do you?
I do.
Well, that might be a typo. Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland starred in a movie version of one of Rodgers and Hart classics, Babes in Arms. Well, what happened?
In late April of 1943, Hart, already battling depression, learned that his beloved mother had passed away, which seemed to just crush his spirit, as you can imagine. During this time, the duo was working on a Broadway reworking of the classic tale, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Rodgers struggled to get Hart motivated enough to work on the project. The night of the musical's opening, Hart had disappeared. After 2 days, he was discovered in a hotel room, seriously ill. He was taken to a hospital, but passed away just days later.
So sad.
Personally, Richard Rodgers was devastated at the loss of his lifelong friend and collaborator. Creatively, Rodgers had begun working with another Columbia graduate, Oscar Hammerstien. The two would go on to write and produce the greatest Broadway musicals of all time.
So now here you can see this Time magazine article, and you see there's Lorenz Hart and there's Richard Rodgers. And you know, it's very sad because Lorenz Hart, again, he was very introverted. He really had not much of a social life. He didn't really have many close friends, and he had no relationships. His mother was sort of his world and his work. That's what he really had. And when his mother passed away, he felt so alone. He just began this downward spiral that he could not get out of. So he lost Lorenz Hart very early, and Richard Rodgers was out without a partner. But of course, this would open the door to Hammerstien coming in. So very quickly, Brittany, we have Oscar Hammerstien II. This is actually his grandfather. Kind of a, wow, sophisticated
Dapper
looking man.
fella.
Dapper. I dress like this sometimes when we go out to places, you know, Wendy's, Burger King.
The nice places.
The nice place, Pizza Hut, if we're really going to dress it up. Well, Oscar Hammerstien, he was immersed in music from the beginning because his family, they were also German Jews, just like Richard Rodgers, but his family were second and third generation involved in musical theater, particularly opera. And one thing I want to mention, Brittany, is that when you think about the musicals that came before Oscar Hammerstien and Richard Rodgers, they were very whimsical, like Babes in Arms. They were sort of vaudeville. And the music really did not have anything to say about the plot of the story. But unlike opera, where the music is the story, and opera has drama, and opera has loss. And you would see this informed in the musicals of Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstien. They'd almost be a little bit more like operettas. And so this is where Oscar Hammerstien really got his influence on the later musicals he'd create. And he went to Columbia University, just like Richard Rodgers, just like Lorenz Hart. And he really wanted to do music. His father really did not want his son Oscar to go into music. the theater was something that maybe the family did, but the reality is it was very difficult to make a living in it. And they really thought their son should be a lawyer, as many good Jewish families do, a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or something that you can make a good living. But Oscar Hammerstein was absolutely set on his ways. He wanted to go into the theater, so he ends up leaving Columbia University and begins working for his uncle Arthur at the Hammerstien, one of the Hammerstien theaters. And here's what they did right. They could have said, okay, Oscar, we own the theater, so we're going to give you a cush job. Woo! Earthquake. We're going to give you...
Watch your thing.
Oh. We're going to give you a cush job right away. No. They had him cleaning the floors. They had him working the curtains. They had him working the lights. He learned the billing. He learned the ins and outs of theater. This is important because Oscar Hammerstein would become really the sort of the business brain of the operation later, and together the two would make over $1 billion today in profits from their musicals. So you had to know what you were doing, or you could get taken advantage of. And Oscar Hammerstein learned the business inside and out. But what was Oscar Hammerstein's passion? Writing lyrics. Writing lyrics. So what ends up happening is Hammerstein has the opportunity, and probably his uncle and his father and grandfather, because they were in the theater business, they knew a lot of the luminaries of the time. Here you see pictured George Gershwin, very tall, and not quite as tall, Jerome Kern. These are just two people that the Hammersteins knew. And so Oscar Hammerstein had the opportunity eventually, after he proved himself, to work with people like George Gershwin and Jerome Kern. And it was, in fact, his work with Jerome Kern that opened the door to Oscar Hammerstein to fame. The two of them decided they wanted to make sort of an opera, a musical opera, without the stuffiness of the opera. And so they come up with the idea that today is Showboat. Showboat. And they finally convince a good friend of theirs, a man named Florenz Ziegfeld. Many of you in the audience might remember the name Ziegfeld Follies. Well, Florenz Ziegfeld was a fellow German Jew, and no one else wanted to produce this play, but Florenz Ziegfeld says, I'm going to take a chance. So Jerome Kern, the icon, Oscar Hammerstein, who's relatively new, and Florenz Ziegfeld, the entertainment man, go into business, and they create Showboat. Music by Oscar Hammerstein and Jerome Kern. Opening night, 3 hours into the play, it's over, no one claps. They think they've just lost their shirt. They think their careers are over. What a disaster, no one had clapped. It turned out people were so taken with the emotion of the musical, particularly the ending, which is very melancholy. They were just enthralled. And the lines were around the block the very next day. Showboat was a hit, and it made Oscar Hammerstein. So, the star of Showboat was a man named Paul Robeson, and the hit song was Old Man River. Shall we, Brittany? And again, we'll just watch a little bit of this, not the whole thing. Brittany, I think I've heard you get your voice about that low before.
Not even close, Mark.
Maybe you had a cold?
Not that I recall.
Oh. That'd be impressive, though. I don't think anyone else could have done that musical justice like Paul Robeson. You know, we could do an entire program, sorry about that, people. We could do an entire program on Paul Robeson, but we don't have time. Suffice it to say, he was an amazing individual and controversial figure as well. But that voice. So what happens, people? Lorenz Hart tragically passes away. And Jerome Kern, he was already much older than Oscar Hammerstein. And after the strains and stresses of Showboat, Kern was like, you know what? I'm glad I came out on top, but I've had enough. This is too stressful. I'm going to retire. So now the two are sort of free agents. And separately, they hear that each one of them wants to work on an adaptation of a book. I'm going to lose the name. A book by, help me out. It doesn't matter. Okay, well, they want to make a version of Oklahoma. And James Michener. And so they find out, hey, did you know that this guy named Oscar Hammerstein also wants to do a musical on Oklahoma? You should have lunch with him. So they get together and say, we both want to do this musical. We're both good at what we do. Let's just try this and see if our egos can handle it. I mean, they're already on the top of their games. Well, guess what? Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein were just fated to come together because what they ended up doing was evolutionary. They solidified the modern musical, which is, it's not just comedy, it's not just silly, there's drama, there's loss in it. So it would resonate with people. It would be sophisticated, songs like Old Man River, but accessible for the mainstream audience, nothing so haughty as opera. And finally, the songs themselves would propel the plot line of the story and not just be there. Has this ever happened to you, Brittany? Anyone ever just, pour a large stein of beer on your head?
Thankfully, no, that's never happened to me. How about you, Mark?
Yes.
Has it?
More times than I can count.
Sorry to hear that.
I don't like to talk about it.
We can move on.
Well, we should note that Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers won over 34 Tony Awards, 15 Oscars, and 2 Grammys. They made over $200 million in their time, which today would be over $1 billion today. Brittany, I would say that's a successful business partnership.
I'd say they made it.
I think, by all means, they made it. And what this photo is sort of illustrating, other than the fact that it makes me slightly uncomfortable, is the fact that they also were sort of kingmakers. A little bit like Ed Sullivan would have someone come on the Ed Sullivan Show, and then all of a sudden the whole world would know about him, like the Jackson 5 or the Beatles. Well, they would discover young talent, and they'd given them an opportunity, and when that young talent was in a Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein musical, it would launch their careers. People like Julie Andrews, Shirley Jones, and Mary Martin, these are household names, but they weren't before Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein discovered them. We don't have a lot of time to go in the stories of the first ladies of theater, but I want you to know that Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein had one other rule, other than there's always going to be drama and loss in their plays, and the music will propel the plot. They weren't going to use well-known actors and actresses. At the time, Ethel Merman was everywhere, and they said, if we do a play with Ethel Merman, they'll just see Ethel Merman singing this song. No, let's get relative unknowns, because then you'll really believe the story. Can we just take a look at one of these great actresses, Shirley Jones, because I love Shirley Jones' voice, and you can see why she was in so many Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein plays. This, by the way, is The Music Man.
Except 15 minutes.
Oh, I don't mean that kind of late. Well, I'd say about 36 years late. It took you all this time to get to the footbridge with a fellow.
If you want to know the truth, it was almost longer.
Oh?
Halfway here, I nearly turned back. I suppose I'm not the first person to discover a girl doesn't think too clearly when under the spell of your salesmanship.
Oh, now, Miss Marion, you surely don't think I've been trying to sell you anything.
Oh, no. You've given me something. That's why I had to come.
I don't recall giving
Oh, yes. Something beautiful. That's why I came. And I'm so glad. Oh, please don't be afraid that I expect too much more. One can't expect a traveling salesman to stay put. And I know there have been many ports of call, and there'll be many more. Still, I can be grateful for what you've left behind. For me.
Marion.
There were bells on the hill, but I never
What a voice.
heard them ringing. No, I never heard them at all, till there was you. There were birds in the sky, but I never saw them winging. No, I never saw them at all, till there was you. And there was music.
Wow.
There were whoops.
Brittany, the last time you were on a footbridge, did you also just do that? You and your husband Ben, did you just start singing like that? Just
I mean, yeah. Sometimes the beauty of wherever you're walking,
particularly
of
a
nature,
footbridge.
it just overcomes you.
And then you just
have
start
to
singing.
sing. You have to just
There were
let it out.
birds in the yeah. Well, you can see how beautiful and lovely Shirley Jones' voice was. So not surprisingly, with a voice like that, when their musical Oklahoma is developed, they decide they want Shirley Jones, again, at the time, no one really knew who she was, to star in their production of Oklahoma. And along with Shirley Jones, the lead actor is, I always forget his name, and I'm going to cheat and see if I can find it here. Can you see his name? Gordon McRae. There it is. Gordon McRae and Shirley Jones. And their very first musical together, Oscar Hammerstien and Richard Rodgers, wins an Academy Award.
Of course.
And every single song in that musical, you all know Oklahoma, they're all good. Surrey with a Fringe on Top, amazing songs. Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, amazing song. People Will Say We're in Love. Every single song in that musical is a huge hit. And after the success of Oklahoma, they decide they're going to work together, they're going to continue to collaborate. So it was really the success right out of the gate that really formed their bond. Okay, so we're not going to be singing Oh What a Beautiful Morning, because we're short on time. We're going to watch the clip of Surrey with the Fringe on Top, Gordon McRae and Shirley
Let's go to the
Jones.
Fox Social. Oh, you two.
If you asked me, I wouldn't go with you. Besides, how'd you take me? You ain't bought a new buggy with red wheels onto it, have you?
No, I ain't.
Spanking team with their bridles all a-jingling?
No.
Expect me to ride on behind old Blue, I guess. You better ask that old Cummins gal you took such a shine to.
If I was to ask you, Miss Laurie Spotty, there'd be a way to take you.
Oh, they would. How'd we get there?
When I take you out tonight with me, honey, here's the way it's gonna be. You will sit behind a team of snow white horses in the slickest gig you ever see. Chicks and ducks and geese better scurry when I take you out in the Surrey. When I take you out in the Surrey with the fringe on top. Watch that fringe and see how it flutters when I drive them high-stepping scutters. Nosy pokes will peek through the shutters and their eyes will pop. The wheels are yellow, the upholstery's brown, the dashboard's genuine leather. With eyes and glass curtains you can roll right down in case there's a change in the weather. Two bright side lights winking and blinking, ain't no finer rig, I'm a-thinking. You can keep your rig if you're thinking that I'd care to swap for that shiny little Surrey with the fringe on the top.
Ooh.
Would you say
on the top. What a great voice, Gordon McCrae. That pair was so classic that they actually worked together again further down the road in another Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers production. South Pacific was their next project, and this, more than many of the other plays, harkens back to Hammerstein's influence of the opera. One of the heroes actually dies in the musical. If you've never seen it, I apologize, I gave that away. There's definitely loss and there's controversy in it. The music, has a operatic flair to it. Some enchanted evening. So you really see the influences of the opera in this production of South Pacific. And just like Oklahoma, it was based on an actual novel by James Michener. And they got opera singer Ezio Pinza to star in the Broadway version, and they brought in Mary Martin, who had become really one of their favorites, Mary Martin. We have a clip. It doesn't work very well, to be honest with you. It's tinny and not great. Maybe instead, we should just sing a little bit of Some Enchanted Evening. I know you're in your rooms. I know you're in your homes. Let's sing just a little bit of it together. Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger. You may see a stranger across a crowded room. And somehow you'll know even then, that somewhere you'll see her again and again. Some enchanted evening, someone may be laughing. You may hear her laughing across a crowded room. And night after night, as strange as it seems, the sound of her laughter will sing in your dreams. All together, who can explain it? Who can tell you why? Fools give you reasons, wise men never try. Swallow. Some enchanted evening, when you find your true love, when you feel her call you across a crowded room, then fly to her side and make her your own. For all through your life you may dream all alone. Once you have found her, never let her go. Once you have found her, never let her go. Thank you very much. I will be at the White Castle off of Robert Street in West St. Paul at 3 a.m. on Sunday. Be the first 2 people to show up, Brittany, and win a cheese fry.
Wow. I'm usually sleeping at that hour, but I'll think about it.
They told me it was a big...
Can I get back to you?
They told me it'd be a big gig.
Good luck.
Okay, so Carousel. We're not going to spend much time on Carousel. It has the elements, first of all, it brings back Shirley Jones and Gordon McCrae in a very different musical. And this one, just like South Pacific, the hero dies. She's going to have a baby. He needs a supporter. He does a robbery, and he's killed in the robbery. And he dies. Okay, that's the musical. But the reason I added Carousel with our limited time is because the song from Carousel is You'll Never Walk Alone. And I'm sorry, audience, if you don't agree. I would argue that this is Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein's greatest song, even better than Climb Every Mountain. Forgive me. That is not it. It is You'll Never Walk Alone. We're going to see it performed here, hopefully, by a Norwegian singer, Cecil, because we couldn't get the actual video from the musical. We'll play just a little bit of it, but hear how beautiful. That is a gorgeous kitchen, Brittany, by the way. See if you are not inspired by the beauty of the song. You'll Never Walk Alone. We'll just do a little bit.
And don't be
all could have seen Mark dancing.
I couldn't help myself.
Just it moves you.
I was definitely moved. I was definitely moved. I was moving a lot, actually. It was just so beautiful. And you know, I think you would agree that Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstien really created almost a hymn, a spiritual. That song could be at weddings. It could be at anniversaries. It's almost a spiritual. We're going to run short on time. Let's just say The King and I was really groundbreaking. They couldn't get Yul Brynner. Can you imagine The King and I without Yul Brynner, that beautiful bald head? They couldn't get him. They couldn't get him. And it took Mary Martin, the amazing Mary Martin, who Oscar Hammerstien and Richard Rodgers helped discover, convinced Yul Brynner to take the role as the king of Siam in The King and I. And that was, you know, Yul Brynner was in a lot of movies, but on Broadway or in the movie, it was always Yul Brynner. Right by the time he retired. He starred with Gertrude Lawrence on stage. They won a Tony for the musical, The King and I. Shall we dance? Do, 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 do. Shall we dance? A great musical. And this was said to be the most difficult musical for them to have ever written, because they had to incorporate Asian influences into the melodies, which is not an area that two men from Queens, New York, were that all familiar with. So it was quite challenging for them to do, but I think you'd all agree that the final product is one of the greatest musicals of all time. So let's see a little clip from The King and I, Gertrude Lawrence and Yul Brynner.
Introduced, I do not know you well, but when the music started, something drew me to your side. So many men and girls are in each other's arms. It made me think we might be similarly occupied. Shall we dance on a bright cloud of music? Shall we fly?
Papa.
Shall we dance? Shall we then say goodnight and mean goodbye? Or perchance, when the last little star has left the sky, shall we still be together with our arms around each other? And shall you be my new romance? On the clear understanding that this kind of thing can happen, shall we dance? Shall we dance? Shall we dance?
I have a few of those dresses in my closet.
Why do you stop? You're not speaking. Go on, go on.
Where would to work tomorrow?
I didn't realize.
Well,
Tomorrow's Saturday.
After all, I'm
don't
not
wear
a
it.
dancing girl.
Maybe Monday.
In England, no woman can dance alone while a man is looking at her.
But you will dance with strange man, holding hands, etc.
Yes, but not always a stranger. Usually a very good friend.
Good, everyone else together. You show me. Teach, teach, teach.
Well, it's quite simple, the polka. You count 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and. Shall we dance
1, 2, 3, and.
on a bright cloud of music? Shall we fly?
1, 2, 3, and.
Shall we dance?
1, 2, 3, and.
Shall we then say goodnight and mean goodbye?
1, 2, 3, and. Or perchance, when the last little star has seen the sky,
Shall we still be together with our arms around each other? And shall you be my new romance? On the clear understanding that this kind of thing can happen.
shall we dance?
Shall we dance? Shall we dance?
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
Well, I'd love to watch them dance, but again, we have limited time. But Yul Brynner just inhabited that role in such a way that no one else could take it. You know, in future productions of most any Oscar Hammerstien, Richard Rodgers program, they use different actors and actresses, but Yul Brynner always was the king of Siam. And a lot of people remember him as that. So what a wonderful musical it was, what a classic. And now, well, we don't have time to sing Getting to Know You, which is too bad because it's a great song. But, you know, again, one of the great musical numbers from The King and I. Well, we finish up now with The Sound of Music. And it's maybe appropriate that their final musical was their best musical. Brittany, why was it their final musical? Do you know? Oscar Hammerstien developed cancer. And believe it or not, as he was writing songs like Climb Every Mountain, Edelweiss, he was dying of stomach cancer. The last song Oscar Hammerstien ever composed was Climb Every Mountain. We all know that Sound of Music is based loosely on a real family, the Von Trapp family, who escaped from Austria. The husband truly was, I believe, an admiral or a captain in the Austrian Navy. This right here is the real Maria Von Trapp. She got a little minor role in the musical, one that you probably won't even remember because it was very brief. The musical starred Theodore Bikel. Now, Theodore Bikel was a great name on Broadway. He also was Jewish, and he had escaped Austria from the Nazis. So he had a little bit of a personal story that was a little bit similar to the Von Trapps themselves. And they used Mary Martin, who was really their go-to, as Maria Von Trapp. Now, this is very touching, that Oscar Hammerstien did not live, unfortunately, to see the movie. But he did live long enough to see the play come out. The musical, the first run of the musical, ran for 1,443 performances. Let me repeat, that's the first run. It was the most successful musical on Broadway history. And it was their final musical together because Oscar Hammerstien passed away. Every song from The Sound of Music is classic. Every single song. Why don't we sing one together, and then we'll need to be done. Please sing along with us in the audience. Brittany? Edelweiss, Edelweiss, every morning you greet me, small and white, clean and bright, you look happy to meet me. Blossom of snow, may you bloom and grow forever. Edelweiss, Edelweiss, bless my homeland forever. Such a beautiful song. The musical was actually shot in Austria. We actually have a coworker, Brittany and I, who went to Austria and actually visited the very production spots. So let's wrap it up. The Sound of Music was their last musical. Do you want to watch? No. Okay. So, the legacies. Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstien had very little time to work together before Oscar Hammerstien passed away. And yet, in that short time, they created the most memorable musicals of all time, hands down. Oscar Hammerstien was a workaholic. He had no family. He had no children when he died. Really, what he left was his musical legacy. Richard Rodgers found time to have a family. His daughter, Mary, went on to be an award-winning children's storybook writer and musician. This is his daughter, Mary, Richard Rodgers' daughter. And his son, I look a lot like him, by the way, his son, Richard Rodgers' son, went on to win 2 Tony Awards of his own as a Broadway director and producer, Adam. So the apple didn't fall very far from the tree with Richard Rodgers' family. His son has gone on, and there is a Richard Rodgers Theater in New York where some of the greatest people have studied and performed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for Rodgers and Hammerstien.